Started. Thank you again. Welcome to today's webinar, the Wildlands Managing for Conservation. My name is Kirsten. I'll be your host. Thanks for being here. This is the third session in our four-part webinar series. I'm going to give you a brief overview of our agenda today. I'll begin with a few quick housekeeping items, and then we will have a quick introduction to the Regional Parks Foundation, followed by the main presentation from our guest speakers, and then we'll have a Q&A session and wrap up. Throughout the presentation, you're welcome to use the Q&A feature in the footer of your window to submit questions, and we will answer questions during the Q&A session after the main presentation. The session is being recorded, and as always, I will send a follow-up email with the link to the recording, and we also have live captioning available. I would like to introduce you to Jakob Berenstein. He is a member of our board of directors here at the Regional Parks Foundation, and he will tell you a little bit about the foundation. Jakob?
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Kirsten. Hi, everyone. I'm Jakob Berenstein. I'm privileged to serve on the board of directors of the Regional Parks Foundation. If you've attended the first or one of the first two instances of this webinar series, I suppose you've already probably either heard from me or my colleague Amber. I apologize if any of this is repeated information, but if it's your first time, then welcome, and glad to share a little bit about the foundation with you. I'm an East Bay native myself, so I've been very grateful to live near the parks, the East Bay Regional Park District, for much of my life, and now very grateful to engage a little bit more closely through the foundation. Just want to share a little bit about this wonderful organization with you. As a refresher, the objective of the foundation in serving the East Bay Regional Park District is to provide universal access to the parks, promote environmental stewardship, education, recreational programs, and even at times get involved in the acquisition of new parklands. And what does this mean from sort of a practical experience or practical results perspective? It means young people from all walks of life get to experience the wonders of the parks. So for example, last year in 2024, the foundation supported over 3,000 students and teachers in enjoying and getting involved in outdoor education, as well as over 1,000 scholarships for aquatics and camp programs to help underprivileged youth better access the parks. It also means that people of all physical abilities can access and enjoy our wild lands. Again, as an example, from last year in 2024, the foundation helped provide over 6,000 individuals with bus rides to community programs in the parks. So really, all in all, helping connect our communities to this wonderful resource we have within the parks, and at the end of the day, preserving these spaces for our generations to come. It's a wonderful organization, and all this is made possible by individual donors and contributors and volunteers like yourselves, as well as some of our corporate and institutional partners as well. You've got the QR code here in front of you if you'd like to learn more about the foundation. Obviously, if you found out about this webinar, maybe you've already explored the website a little bit, but do take a look for the many opportunities and resources the foundation offers, both directly and through the East Bay Regional Park District. So without further ado, thank you for your time and taking your lunch break to learn a little bit more about conservation and the parks. I'll hand it over to our wonderful panelists now.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Wild Within Reach. We would like to thank the Regional Parks Foundation for facilitating this series, and we are happy to present our talk today, The Wildlands, Managing for Conservation. I'm Doug Bell, Wildlife Program Manager in the Stewardship Department at the district. I've been working with the district since 2005 and oversee a wildlife unit, including 3 additional most excellent wildlife biologists, Doc Quack, Tammy Lim, and Natalie Reeder. Joining me later in this talk is Becky Tuden, former Ecological Services Manager with the district. We appreciate her coming back to present her own personal take on the district's efforts to manage for conservation. I will provide an introduction to the district and a few of our programs that we in wildlife are engaged in, and Becky will follow up with the bigger picture on managing for conservation. Okay, let's get started. To orient you, this map depicts our parklands in dark green embedded in the matrix of the two-county region. We want to note that East Bay Parklands are located on the ancestral homelands of the Ohlone, Bay Miwok, and Delta Yoku. We have 73 parks spread over across more than 125,000 acres with 1,300 miles of trails laced throughout the region. Our parklands range from the SF Bay shoreline in the west to regional wilderness in the Intercoast Range to the east, and they encompass every habitat in the region: marshes, chaparral, grasslands, woodlands, lakes, and streams. Hopefully, many of you watching this webinar today have already enjoyed at least one of our parks, if not more. Before I move on to the next slide, there's one more key takeaway from this map. Note the other open space lands in light green located throughout our region: Mount Diablo State Park, East Bay Mud, Contra Costa Water, San Francisco Water. Many of these properties adjoin ours, which offer opportunities to manage for conservation across multiple agencies and multiple districts. This may be obvious to you, but the Bay Area is a complex place with its varied topography, habitats, diverse cultures, and interests. That is what makes it so wonderful to live here. We are the oldest regional park in the country, and thank goodness good folks had the good sense back in 1934 to create the district. Were they successful? Well, you may be the judge, but I say the proof is in the pudding. On average nowadays, we see over 25 million visitors per year. How fortunate that we can offer recreation to so many. But we also have another core guiding principle: to preserve a rich heritage of natural and cultural resources, to preserve species from flowers to ducks and everything in between. In effect, we have a dual mission. I hope by the end of this talk, you'll have a better understanding of our challenges to meet our dual mission, and that is balancing recreation and conservation. We live in a very special place in terms of biodiversity. We are one of 35 biodiversity hotspots in the world. A hotspot has both the highest total number of species and the highest number of endemic species, which are species that occur nowhere else. And so right here in the Bay Area, we have 3 of those: Alameda whipsnake at the top of the screen, Ridgway's rail in between, and the salt marsh harvest mouse. They are only found in the Bay Area, nowhere else. On top of that, we have over 200 special status species shown in the list on the right. These are special status species because they're either listed by the Endangered Species Act or other statutory regulations or mentioned by CEQA. Clearly, we in the East Bay Parks are tasked with an enormous and challenging task to preserve these resource values moving forward. The title of our talk is Managing for Conservation, but we want to go one step further and introduce the idea of active management, namely actions that we are taking to preserve, protect, and restore natural resources going forward. Our goal is sustainability. Why do we need active management? One major reason is habitat loss. For SF Bay, we have lost 95% of our shoreline habitat compared to pre-contact conditions. 95%. This map depicts in orange our shoreline parks that provide habitat for shoreline species, including 4 endangered and threatened species, the 2 I previously mentioned, and then California least tern and western snowy plover. But not all of this protected habitat on our shoreline parks offers the same value to all species. In fact, prior to the 2000s, we had no nesting habitat for the least tern along the shorelines. But thanks to Doc Quack's efforts, beginning in the early 2000s, he created a nesting island at Hayward Regional Shoreline, now known as Tern Island. This effort was a huge volunteer input, involved wildlife volunteers, grant funding, and lots of hours to make. But this island now provides refuge and breeding sites for the least tern. And in fact, it is the most successful breeding site for least terns in California. This is what we mean by active management. To drive home what we have lost in habitat, compare Oakland from the 1800s to Oakland now. This is not to say that urban environments do not provide habitat for some wildlife. As you know from Tammy and Dr. Caspy's eloquent talks in this series last time, and Dr. Chris Schell's lab at UC Berkeley, they've been researching human-wildlife issues and interactions in the urban environment. And likewise, we have seen many species like coyotes, deer, turkeys, peregrine falcons move into our built environment. That is the good news, but there's no denying we have drastically altered habitats, which has had a negative impact on biodiversity. Before we can develop plans and assess habitats to restore and preserve, we actually need to know what is on the landscape and how it is doing. This is basically monitoring species and their populations. Unfortunately, it is very hard to obtain funding for this. Most granting agencies fund projects that build and restore habitat, shovel-ready projects, as it were. Monitoring tends to get short shrift. In spite of this, we have a long track record of monitoring species on our parklands and folding this information into active management. Nonetheless, realizing that funding is scarce, but the needs are greater, we formed the East Bay Stewardship Network with partner agencies, including Mount Diablo State Park, East Bay Mud, Contra Costa Water, and SF Water, to develop Nature Check. Nature Check sets a framework for assessing the status of species, of select indicator species, their abundance, their population trends, throughout the 3 subregions of the East Bay that we've identified. And this work has been telling us and providing really great information on, for instance, puma as one of our indicator species, how it is doing in the 3 regions, and what we may need to do to increase and maintain populations. So the data we are gathering helps inform population trends, dispersal corridors, and even highlights the need for habitat connectivity. We're also fortunate to have over 600 ponds throughout the East Bay Stewardship Network that support a host of listed species, such as red-legged frogs, California tiger salamanders, and others. This map illustrates CNDDB occurrences in critical habitat for the 2 species of red-legged frog and CTS throughout our region. Note the west to east trend of increasing occurrences. Our pond work has involved regular surveys of ponds with boots on the ground, or rather, boots in the water. And we've been able to census amphibians, or life stages, aquatic insects, and other parameters to assess the health of these populations. And we're collaborating in research with universities, the U.S. Geological Survey, and others to determine dispersal distances and metapopulations, which will help inform the connectedness of these populations and actually point towards, and I help identify ponds that we would need to restore for promoting climate resiliency in the region. One last example of monitoring for active management I'd like to highlight. So we're monitoring and conducting research on a host of sensitive species. In the case of the Altamont Pass Wind Resource Area, we are working with the U.S. Geological Survey, Fish and Wildlife Service, and others to research the impact of wind energy projects on golden eagles. One goal is to ascertain if our population of golden eagles can withstand the fatality rates they are experiencing through wind turbine strikes. In other words, does the Altamont Pass Wind Resource Area represent a population sink for golden eagles? We're also investigating wind energy impacts and mitigation measures for all volant wildlife, from bats to meadowlarks. Of all the bird guilds, meadowlarks and other grassland birds have been undergoing the most drastic population declines throughout North America. Finally, there are many other sensitive species that we research, such as the longhorn fairy shrimp, pictured in the lower left, which inhabits the wonderful rock vernal pool complexes of Vasco Caves. Really fascinating system, and we're looking at ways to improve and expand habitat opportunities for this absolutely fascinating little fairy shrimp. Despite all we are doing, despite islands of wildlife habitat and active management, we are losing the resources and wildlands we love so much. We remain in a global biodiversity crisis. The graph on the left stems from a scientific report on the health of the nation's bird populations. Aside from waterfowl and a few other groups, the decline in avifauna of North America from the 1970s to the 2010s is stunning and incontrovertible. What could be the drivers for this loss? Well, one proposal is the loss of insects, the loss of insect biodiversity worldwide. The illustration on the right just shows road surveys that were conducted in Europe back in the 1980s versus the 2025s, and with windshields of a car as a proxy for sampling. And in the 1980s, windshields would be plastered full of insects. Now, driving these same routes, the windshields are clean. Clearly, we have an issue to deal with. So this does present opportunities. Clearly, we are the problem, but we're also the solution. Before I turn our talk over to Becky, I'd like to quote Jane Goodall, who passed away just yesterday at the age of 91. In an interview from 2020 aired on NPR last night, I quote her. She said, "Every single one of us, every single day, we make some impact on the planet, and we have a choice as to what impact we make." Becky? Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you for bringing up Jane Goodall. Hi, I'm Becky Tuden. And Doug, you did a great job identifying the issue that we have in front of us, the opportunity we have of meeting this dual mission to offer recreation to our diverse community and to protect and manage our natural resources so they continue to be healthy and vibrant. And you know what? We are fortunate to have this opportunity right now, because back in 1934, as Doug mentioned, the community, our community, voted to form the Park District, and we set aside these lands. It's 90 years later, and we are still grappling with those issues. And that's why I really want to express my gratitude and appreciation to the Regional Park Foundation and to Kirsten for setting up this webinar and giving us an opportunity to discuss these issues in a productive forum. A little bit about myself. I've been a professional working in the environmental and natural resource management field for 4 decades. I have the privilege of working for the federal government, the US EPA, state government of California, local governments, and then I finished up my career here at the Park District. I want to say up front, I absolutely love the Park District. It's a gift, just 15 minutes from my house with my family, my community, my dog, to visit these parks. And it's really, for me, why I choose to live in the East Bay. And I care deeply about our parklands. I've worked for the Park District for a little under 8 years, and I have a pretty strong perspective on how we can best meet this dual mission. It's something that I think about both from a professional sense and a very real personal sense. So I'm not speaking today as a district employee, but I'm sharing my perspective on this. Think of it as an op-ed, and I'm really going to try to compel you. I'm going to try to persuade you using fair, true, and accurate information on how we should proceed with this biological crisis and opportunity. So essentially, it's a 3-prong approach. The first one is projects should be multi-benefit. When we invest in improving in an area, we should invest both in the recreational aspects and amenities and the ecological services they provide, like creeks and forests and habitats. Secondly, we should prioritize those projects that are in under-resourced areas. Areas that have historically been redlined, have fewer natural resources, fewer amenities because of the history of industrialization, and we should focus on those areas. And lastly, and this is where I'm going to spend most of my time talking. The other two, I think the Park District is moving on it, but protecting wildland health, keeping wildlands wild. Think of it as the Yosemites of the East Bay. Previous talks we've mentioned calling them core conservation areas. This would be an important step, an essential step in meeting our dual mission. And turning the huge ship of the Park District to focus on protecting wildland health is a game changer. And that's what the majority of my talk is going to be about. But again, back to big picture, 3 prongs. The first prong, let's do projects on the landscape that invest both in recreation and amenities. And what am I talking about? Well, they should increase the access and they should increase the desirable trails. We want to give people access in areas near where they live, and let's make those trails sustainable and desirable. We've been relying on these legacy ranch roads that are steep, uphill, baking in the sun. Well, let's try to get trails that people like. Let's have them be nearer to where they live. And at the same time, let's have these projects improve the access and the resiliency and provide a buffer against climate change. The example that we just finished, the Park District just finished, is the Alder Creek Restoration Project within Sibley Park. It opened a new area of the park to the public, added a staging area, trails, and it also daylighted a creek, took a creek that was underground with sinkholes and instead daylighted it, provided native plantings, removed invasive vegetation, and improved habitat for trout. So it did all of those things, increased the access, provided desirable trails, and provided habitat improvement. We are doing many of these in the Park District. Currently, about 25% of the budgets are multi-benefit projects. We could have a healthy discussion on whether we should have more than 25% of our budget, but I think we can all say these are a good idea. So second prong, let's prioritize the access and our capital investments in areas where the natural resources and the amenities are currently scarce and or degraded. The United States actually has a very interesting paradox that I've been reading about. Despite how wealthy we are, we're less happy than other countries. And one of the reasons that has been put forward is because we have more inequality. We're generally happier when we look around us and our environment is healthy and other people around us are healthy. So we can make ourselves happier by lifting everyone up. And what you see here is a picture from the Dotson Family Marsh in Point Pinole. It's in the heart of Richmond. It was a project the Park District finished in 2019. And the beauty of this project is that it invests in open space in an urban area that has historically been under-resourced, the city of Richmond. Not just open space, but higher quality open space, restored marshes, boardwalks, curlews, black rails. It's not just providing habitat for crows and feral cats. It also included new trails, new staging area, crossing over railroad tracks. And we also have other projects in the Park District in under-resourced areas. Bay Point was another project, and currently the Park District is in the permitting phase for the Hayward Marsh Restoration Project. These are all great things. So what's the third prong? And again, this is where I'm going to spend most of my time because it's not something that we're doing now very well, and it's important. So the third prong is keeping these wildland wild. And I want to start with the assumption that we value healthy parks. We value wildlife, plant communities, and beautiful open spaces. We want to see bobcats and frogs. We want them to continue to thrive. We have enough cities and concrete. What we need to do is take care of these rare places that are wild. What do I mean by wildlands? Well, open space is a continuum, as we've heard in our previous talks. You can look at downtown Oakland, it's a cityscape. Then you can go to a picnic area or a local park. Is that a wildland? No, but it provides more habitat. When I talk about wildlands, I'm talking about those larger, intact landscape areas that have a buffer from the rest of urbanization. And when I say intact, they have integrity in that they're able to support a larger suite of animals, and they have a mosaic of plant communities that's both biodiverse and also more abundant. We have very few of these left. We've already talked about the habitat loss across the whole area, but there are some areas in our East Bay that I would call the Yosemites that are rare and precious. And something rare and precious needs to be protected. And right now, what we've done with these areas is we've set them aside from development, but they are not protected. And I'm convinced that in order to have healthy wildlands, we need to take action to protect those areas so that they remain intact and unfragmented. We need to do more than just set them aside from development. And we need to do that now before they're degraded any further. But wait, they're protected. What are we doing to them? Well, the sad reality is that recreation has impacts. We people are degrading these wildlands just by visiting them. We bring in litter, we make noise. Did you know that e-bikes have been shown in studies that the frequency they emit impacts bats? People like feeding animals, which increases human-wildlife conflicts. There's an ordinance against it, but people love to feed a raccoon. They feel like they're helping people out. But it becomes a public safety hazard. It can lead to overcrowding of those animals, which can spread disease. The wildlife can become habituated to people. They can become aggressive to humans, and it disrupts that balance. Yes, it's really nice to feed a raccoon, but what happens when you end up feeding a huge feral pig at your dumpster? So the more we introduce people into those areas, you're getting more dumpsters, trash bins, noise, light. More of those areas are affected. Dogs are another issue. When we bring dogs into sensitive areas, like this picture showing them in creek habitats, they're impacting the erosion in the creek. Often they chase other animals. And it's not just one dog. because there's 25 million visitors to those East Bay parks. So that has a cumulative impact. Well, wait a minute, we have signage. We can make a difference. People do care about wildlife. I know they do, but most people find signs annoying, and at best, they don't pay much attention to them. And it actually relies on the goodwill of people, and it requires that people understand. More educated is needed on signage and why we have it, especially in highly populated areas. But for those areas that we care about and that are precious and rare, the better alternative is that we don't rely on their goodwill, but we have areas dedicated for habitat. So yes, we introduce litter and noise, but what we're also doing when we introduce human activity is we're fragmenting these areas. We're making them less intact. We're taking away their integrity. Have you noticed that wild animals don't really want to be around people? They flush, they leave the area. So the more that we are adding people to the landscape, the more we are having bikers, hikers, horseback riders, dogs, bird watchers, wildflower viewers, whatever the activity, as we cross into these wildlands, they become less available as habitat. So this is a picture of the East Bay Hills this is 580 on the top, and this is 680 running north-south. It's pretty much encompasses the Pleasanton Ridge parklands. And as you know, this area is already hemmed in by freeways. We've already had a lot of impacts on these landscapes. Do we need those freeways? Yes. Do they have impacts? Yes. Are we going to remove them? No. But let's look at what we can do. In just 1 year, these are visits in 2023 shown by the increase in color here is the intensity of usage versus increase in 2024. Notice the dramatic increase in usage in just 1 year. And this is in addition to the freeways, the roadways, the airplanes, the PG&E transmission lines, the fences, the housing, not to mention the impacts that we're seeing and the crisis we're seeing from climate change impacts. So our activity is shrinking and fragmenting this habitat. But it's within our control to manage. This is a picture of that same area, Pleasanton Ridge Park, and these red stars are where we've recently introduced staging areas. That's within the last, 5 or 6 years. And again, these lines that you're seeing that are purple are where we have documented people moving through the area. Basically, people using cell phones who are using these apps while they're biking or hiking, so we can see how much use an area is getting. Note these light green areas. Those are areas that are land banked, that have not been open to the public yet. And you'll see that there is much less activity in those areas that are land banked and not yet open. Those are the wildlands. Those are the intact, unfragmented areas that we're looking at. But wait a minute, can't we control which parks people go in and how they use the park, making sure that they stay on those trails so they don't disturb the habitat? The expansion of bootleg trails is a significant issue right now for every single East Bay Regional Park. People are going into parks and building their own trails. There's a lot of reasons for this. Maybe they don't understand that they're having habitat fragmentation and impacts. This picture on the left is in Briones Park. You can see this person can barely, such a steep slope that they're barely able to stand upright. And these are built through creek corridors that were not meant to have trails. Or on the right, they're putting sandbags so they can have jump spots, or they're cutting through this chaparral habitat. And I don't think they understand that they're causing habitat fragmentation. Maybe they feel that they are not getting the types of trails they want. Maybe they're following cattle trails and thinking that it's a good thing to keep going. These increase in these trails and this porousness that is being created through the parklands is very difficult to detect and control and remove, especially because the people who are building them believe they have entitlement to build them on public lands. But I want to point out that we don't have bootleg trails on private lands. And very importantly, is in those areas that are not open to the public, that are land banked areas, we don't have nearly the number of bootleg trails. So we need to continue educating the public about the importance of using the trails appropriately, this green check, but a better option is to make sure we have areas where people are not supposed to go. So this is the big thing I want to encourage us to think about, is to keep wildlands wild. We need to set aside sanctuaries. We need to set aside areas that we're specifically protecting for habitat function, integrity, and protect from the impacts of recreation. And we have an example of that, which is in Vasco Caves. It's a parkland that has very strictly controlled public access. And there are no other lands set aside in the park district that are specifically identified as protection, as a sanctuary for wildlife and habitat. We do have lands that have been set aside as mitigation because we had impacts, and now we're protecting them. But that's offsetting previous impacts. That's not protecting these areas from future fragmentation or giving us insurance for the future. So why don't we have protection of these lands, of our wildlands? What is it going to take to have this shift in priority so that we can protect these rare and precious wildlands? Well, we can turn this crisis into an opportunity. We are the people who can make this happen. We did it in 1934, and I'm really, really encouraging us to do it again. So, how many lands are we talking about? Well, if we looked around the district and we looked at where we had these wildlands that had these rich natural resources that are isolated, they're not near urban areas, they don't have staging areas, they're not near public transportation. We're looking at roughly about 3 properties, roughly 5%. And when we set aside these areas, as I said, it's an insurance for future generations. It's also not a financial investment. It just means don't build those staging areas. Don't put in new trails. Keep the existing fencing and closures intact. And the 3 properties that we identified as meeting that criteria of wildlands is Owen Canyon, Doolin Canyon, and Clayton Ranch. These are areas not currently open. So let me look at a specific property just to give you a sense as to why we think it qualifies as wildlands and why we think it's a good idea. The Owen property, it is rich in natural resources. It's about 1,000 acres, and it has habitat for a number of amphibians. It has a rich mosaic of oak bay woodlands and grasslands. It also includes habitat for nesting golden eagles. And it's big enough to keep all of those animals happy. It also has some fish resources in that it's a tributary to Alameda Creek. And it also has breeding mountain lions that I will talk about as an indicator of habitat connectivity. So this area is, as I mentioned, is in land bank status. And remember, here's the Owen property here circled. And you can see it also up here where it's not crisscrossed by trails. Notice these pink trails here are other trails in other open parklands that have been built recently. Look at this area. It has an abundance of open space already. When we look at, do we want to invest in an area that has scarce open space? This area has a lot of open space, and it's not near a huge either transportation hub, or it's not easy to get to. So this would be a great area to invest in those wildlands. But one of the most important indicators as to why this really is an important wildland is Doug already mentioned that we've established camera grids around the entire parkland system. And what we're finding is that mountain lions are a really good indicator of whether the habitat is large enough to sustain multiple types of populations and communities, and that they have linkages and connectivity to other areas. We have mountain lions all throughout the East Bay, everywhere. What we don't have everywhere are breeding mountain lions. The only place we have documented breeding mountain lions is in this area of the Owen. It's the only place in the park district. So what does that tell you? Well, when you're young and single, you can go anywhere. You can, you don't mind. You can, you can stop off at the taco stand. But when you're raising young, when you're raising your kids, you want a place that's safe, that has resources, and that can support you. And that's what we're seeing in the Owen. So what's the problem? Why can't we just say, no, let's not access it? Well, this area happens to be, about 30 years ago, it was designated as a really good opportunity to have a regional trail connecting the parks. And right here is where these two properties connect. So you could go from Garin into this area that would be Pleasanton Ridge. Well, we can still have people do that if you want, you know, Boy Scouts from Hayward taking a regional trail. We can have managed access. We just aren't going to have unfettered open access. Or we can wait and see if there's another property that becomes available. Or we could invest in trails that are more sustainable, because the idea was just to leave these ranch roads here. Or we can invest in areas that are closer to more users. And also, I think what we also should do is really give the public the choice on whether they want to open this land, given that it is such a rare and precious area. So it would be a game changer for the park district to actively protect these wildlands. And one of the reasons I think we're not doing it is because people haven't communicated to their community. They haven't communicated to their board members asking them for this. People come to board meetings saying, I want more biking trails. I want more staging areas. I want to open up the swimming pool. I think we need to have people come to the board meetings and ask, what are we doing to adequately protect these wildlands? And I'm encouraging you, I'm asking you to take action to do that. Board members are nice people. I encourage you to call them up and talk to them. These red dots show you where those 3 potential wildland or core conservation areas are. And this is a ward map, and here are the pictures of the people that you vote for. And we're also, this is another key time to step in, is because the park district is in the process of creating a district plan. I like to call it the next century district plan, because we've been around 90 years. Let's discuss where we want to be in the next 90 years. This is a good opportunity to weigh in and say, we want to keep wildlands wild. We want to protect these areas. So planning for the future, we did it back in 1934, and we can do it again. Let's set aside 1 to 5% now as insurance for future generations for these wildlands. And again, it's not a big ticket item in terms of budget. It actually means don't build that staging area. Don't put those trails on a map. Keep it the way it is. Let's protect 1 to 5% of our wildlands or more. Let's keep the wildlands wild. Lastly, I want to remember these are your parklands. Your voice counts. If you have questions about this, please follow up with the Regional Park Foundation or the Park District. I know that we all care about having recreation in open spaces. And I know that we also want to know that these spaces are healthy and thriving. And that was my talk. Thank you. I want to remind you that we have a talk coming up next week. It's an opportunity to do restoration in Wildcat Creek. It's a watershed in our backyard. It's also an intact watershed in that we own from the headwaters about 3/4 of the way down to the bay. And it's an opportunity to remove a dam and restore historic fish passage. Think Klamath River in your backyard. And now I'll turn it back over to Kirsten to manage for questions. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Becky. Thank you, Doug. I will stop sharing the presentation real quick so we can answer some of your questions. And if you haven't noticed it already, we are actually today all in the same space. So we will try. Oh yeah, now you can see all of us. Can you come a little bit closer? Otherwise I'll have to turn off. Oh, perfect. All right, thank you again for your presentation. I really appreciate it. Let me open our Q&A. Everybody, if you have questions and you haven't asked a question yet, you can put it in the Q&A and we'll go through as many as we can. And I'll leave it up to you who wants to address any of these questions. I'll just read them out loud. The first two are about the conflict between recreation and conservation. If Norma asks, if BRPD honors and respects my Ohlone ancestors, why did staff even consider spending time on a mountain bike park in the heart of Wildcat? No wildlife is aided by mountain bikes. Do either one of you want to comment?
You know, I was going to say something about that project. So this is a project that's being discussed in the Wildcat parkland, and we've had 200 plus high schoolers from Richmond, El Cerrito, Berkeley, Albany High come and talk about the importance of mountain biking and needing more of those areas. And you know, I think mountain biking is a good thing. I think letting kids go out mountain biking rather than scroll on their screens is a good thing. Absolutely. I do think that project will have an impact. You're going to have more people using the trails. You're going to have to, it's going to affect the management of the area for grazing for sensitive plants. So what are we going to do to offset that impact? If that's something that we decide that we want, what are we going to do to raise up the surrounding areas as an alternative? So that's really the question. If we do want that, what can we do to do better with the other natural resources? If we decide that that's an appropriate place to put that type of trail, is it near an urban area? Is it going to meet a lot of needs? Is it something we don't have a lot of? Well, then how are we going to invest in the natural resources? And I think one opportunity is the nearby Wildcat Creek. So anyway, it is a conflict. We have limited resources, but if we are taking something away, let's give more back. That's my answer. Doug, did you want to add?
Yeah, I would just add that, you know, in a situation like this, we have our cultural resources manager, Anna Marie Guerrero, and it'd be important if you have concerns or issues to reach out to her. She'd be much more qualified than, say, someone like me to comment on particular relationships, but I'd recommend contacting her, and we could probably provide that contact information in the next.
Yeah, I can add that to the follow-up email as well. Thank you. There's one more question about mountain bike trails. Let me know if you want to add anything. Tina asks, I know the Park District was piloting mountain bike trails in a Bell program. How did that go? And do you see opening additional trails up to mountain bikers?
So I think there was a Bell program. There was a concern that because of our trails that there were bicyclists using them, horseback riders and hikers, and that it was having a bell on your bicycle was a good way to notify people who might be hiking or other activities on a trail that a bicyclist was coming. I don't know what we're doing with that program or effort. So I would, that's something we can follow up with as well.
And we could contact our trail department.
Yeah.
They may be able to inform us. Yeah.
I'll try and find out more.
Thank you.
How do you differentiate between primitive trails and managed trails? Those unmanaged trails looked like appetizing primitive trails, which I know many hikers enjoy.
Thank you for clarifying that question. I wasn't necessarily talking about managed trails so much as managed access. There are different types of trails. I would call the desirable trails the ones that are inviting and maybe shaded and surrounded by beautiful nature. And then we have kind of the wide fire roads that might not have shade, that are often historically been used as ranchos. And then we have paved wide roads. So when I was speaking about managed trails, I was thinking about managing the access to that area and restricting access in areas that we want to keep unfragmented. I hope that answers your question. Doug, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that's good. Thanks.
Thank you. Tina asks, Becky, you mentioned that you're not giving this talk as a Park District employee. Does the district officially share your perspective on preserving the banked land?
I think that answer is probably no. That's not to say that they haven't heard about it or talked about it or aren't considering it, but they certainly have not come forward and adopted that as one of their policies or decided to move forward with that. That's why, based on my experience working in the park districts and seeing what I could see about our natural resources, our Yosemites of the East Bay, I really think it's something that we want them to adopt. And it's, as I said, it's a game changer because the park district has, I think, a big bias for recreation everywhere. And I have a bias for recreation, but not everywhere. Doug, did you want to say about the official park district position on this?
I think you said it eloquently. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Question from Hafsa. Is there an alliance with local indigenous communities and land trusts to accomplish the conservation of contiguous lands?
I can refer again to our cultural resources manager. That's a really good question. And she is very much involved with local indigenous communities, and that's really a great step forward. She is reaching out to them and sort of folding them into the processes and their concerns. So I think going forward, there'll be a lot more input from those communities. Thank you. That's a great question.
Yeah, thank you for introducing that. And I one of the things I mentioned to say is that I am not an expert in cultural resources, and I really focused on the natural resources, but cultural resources are very important. And in my experience with the park district, there's preserving those in situ cultural resources, pieces of sacred, what am I trying to say? Where we have indications that previous communities and indigenous cultures lived there. And those we do try to protect. Actively requesting that those indigenous communities come in and manage lands is a great idea. I am not familiar with that. I'm not working on that, but that is something that we should also consider when we're looking at how to manage our lands.
Thank you. Glenn is asking, is 5% really enough? Shouldn't we be shooting for something higher?
Oh, well, we could have a very interesting discussion. I just want us to get the nose of the camel. I just want us to get a few foundational areas of linkages of refuges that can be connected across the landscape and see how that goes. Of course, we could always do more, but I want us to be thoughtful and I want us to feel good about that decision, not feel like it's a land grab.
Doug,
Doug, what do you think?
Well, we can always aim high. But again, we're 25 million visitors a year. There's a huge, human societal pressure to enjoy the parks. And so again, balancing preservation with recreation, that's the goal. That's the whole ball of wax that we're trying to maintain moving forward.
I do think that one way maybe to get at that is when we are talking about opening up land banked areas, we should really be transparent at these board meetings for the community to see that we are transforming that from a potential wildland to now a recreational amenity. And so that should be on the table as an opportunity cost and as a pivotal decision, so that we can really think about that decision. Because I think we often have difficulty doing that in the moment because we look at, do we want a staging area? Do we want a picnic area? Do we want short trails or long trails? And really the foundational question is this the appropriate place to be adding more recreation at this time?
Another question about Wildcat Canyon from Janet. Is there a thorough inventory of the animals and plants in Wildcat Canyon?
I would say we have a very good inventory. Our fisheries folks have been surveying the creek for the longest time, so the aquatic animals are very much inventoried. And in the surrounding area, Wildcat, it includes Tilden Park. That was one of our original parks going back to the 1930s. So we have a very good sense of the animal and plant assemblages that are present there. In addition, it's right behind UC Berkeley. We have a number of research permits with various and sundry labs at UC Berkeley that will come in and use Tilden. And so over the years, over the decades, we have a tremendous resource inventory based on those studies, specific studies, special studies, and even classroom uses like natural history of the vertebrates used to come into, and still does, into Tilden to do a lot of their field trips. So we have a pretty darn thorough inventory, I would say.
Judy asks, how wild is the Ohlone Wilderness?
It's still wild. We have pumas, we have coyotes. It happens to be in one of the densest nesting areas for golden eagles in the region as part of the Diablo Range. It's kind of at the northern end of the Diablo Range before you hit the Livermore Valley and all the development as it moves up north to the Carquinez Strait. So it's very wild. It's partly very wild because it adjoins large expanses of protected lands, protected open space lands like San Francisco Water, as well as very large private inholdings where it's not open to the public at all. So it's a very wild place. There's a trail that goes through it, from Del Val all the way over to Mission Peak. People take that all the time, but that's kind of a limited thoroughfare. So I think when folks are out there, they can really feel like they're back in California in the 1840s.
And I thank you for raising that question, because it is a large, unfragmented area. But I also want to talk about an area in Sunol that we all love to visit, but that we're loving it in a way that is harming the natural resources. And the Alameda Creek that runs through there is now an anadromous fishery, thanks to work that the SFPUC did on actually removing and some barriers and restoring a fish ladder. And we have, for the first time since the dams were built, an opportunity for rainbow trout to actually connect and become anadromous with the bay. We also have 3 other sensitive species that live in that creek. Foothill yellow-legged frog, California red-legged frog, and the western pond turtle. And what we're seeing, unfortunately, is that people are going down into the creek, despite signage, despite naturalists, and they're down at the creek at a very sensitive time when you have the amphibian eggs in the creek, and they're disturbing those and affecting that habitat. So that's an example where it's very difficult to keep people out of the creek. It is, and it's having an impact. Doug, do you want to say anything else?
No, you summed it up succinctly.
You mentioned Nature Check earlier. Where can we read more about Nature Check?
It's on our website, so we can provide you a link. I believe you could do that, Kirsten, afterwards. So you'll be able to have access. It's a great read. It's several hundreds of pages long. Great bedtime reading, or if you're awake at 3 a.m. and need something to read, go for it. But it really sums up all the indicator species that we talked about and provides the science background as to how we're measuring them and what information is being used to determine the trends. So it's a really great thing. And a lot of that was thanks to Becky when she came online.
Well, and do you want to talk about how we're doing the next iteration of Nature Check, and there'll be a website?
Sure, that's almost all imminent. Yes, we're doing the next version. This is almost the 5-year cycle from the last iteration of it. And so it will be coming out as the website, and we'll be uploading sort of reanalyses of the various indicator species as they become available. So stay tuned for that. That's great.
Yeah, and what's really nice about Nature Check is for the first time, all of these landowners across the East Bay are measuring for the same thing. And we're comparing those same indicators across the whole landscape over time. So when we put out the document in 2022, that looked at the previous 10 years. And now we're going to put it out again, or portions of it out again in 2025, and see what changes we've seen. So we'll really get a trend over time.
And we'll be adding more indicator species like insects, for instance.
Thank you, Susan, for your very nice comment. Since we only have a few more minutes, I'm going to skip ahead to the next question, but I'll share the comments with you. Are there any plans to either remove the swimming area at Contra Loma and restore it back to natural habitat, or repair and reopen for public swimming? It has been closed for 5 years, I believe. Thank you for all you do. Anything you can say about that at Contra Loma?
I think the last time we had a visit with a number of the planners, there was talk about whether to restore the swim lagoon for swimming and or look at other possible uses. So I think it's definitely under consideration, but I don't believe any of the plans have gelled yet.
Thank you. And a question from Jim Hansen. Could you say something about the necessary ranges for nesting, mixing populations, feeding, stress reduction for some keystone species? Did I read that correctly?
Yeah.
Can you say something about the necessary ranges for nesting?
Maybe for the golden eagle nest, how you need to have buffers around them, or?
Yeah, certainly. Fortunately, we have a very, extensive population of nesting golden eagles on our properties, as well as a lot of our sister agencies. And their core ranges are roughly run about 2,000 hectares. And so in some areas, they are more uniformly distributed, like the Ohlone Wilderness, and in other areas, they're kind of postage stamp nesting sites when you get into areas like Dueling Canyon or some of these more isolated pockets of habitat in between the urban development. So certainly those nests that are located near regional trails or other human impacted areas, the golden eagle is a very sensitive animal, very prone to disturbance. So often what we will do is close trails for particular nesting eagles to prevent disturbance to them throughout the nesting season. So sometimes you might see a sign trail closed to protect sensitive natural resources. That could be for a number of things, but that's one method that we use.
Any other stress reduction measures for keystone species to reduce stress?
Certainly for a number of the amphibians, like around our ponds, there's efforts to move trails when we're restoring ponds, to move trails away from the pond itself, because most of the ranch roads that we've inherited go right to the ponds because they were built to enable water infrastructure for cattle. So a lot of our restoration efforts are trying to move them away so that the amphibians, tiger salamanders, have a freer range of movement away from the pond, because they spend about 9 months of the year out in ground squirrel burrows and in the terrestrial environment. So it's important to kind of look at the big picture and see what we can do to improve the sorts of movements of animals that need to move when you need to move.
We are almost at time, and there are several more unanswered questions in the Q&A queue. I will see if Doug and Becky are willing to answer those in a way that we can share it in the follow-up email. We'll share other resources, links to Nature Check, etc. as well. And I would also really appreciate it if you could take our really quick post-webinar survey. I will share the link to that in the follow-up email as well, along with the recording. And I really appreciate all of your questions and your passion about this topic. And thank you again to our presenters. Really appreciated this webinar. We hope to see you next week. Thank you for joining us.